Well, let's go ahead and get started. My name is Kristen Hassan, and I am helping to bring together some of the smartest, most experienced folks in our movement for different topics as part of this webinar series hosted by Pedigree Foundation and Shelter Animals Count. And I want to just turn it over to our friend and colleague, Deb Fair, to introduce this call.
Hi, everyone. I'm Deb Fair, and I'm with Pedigree Foundation. I'm the executive director. I know some of you, and some of you I'm getting to meet over this webinar session. As Kristen mentioned, this is a second in our series of Dogs and Data webinars, and today's focus is on transport, which is one of Pedigree Foundation's key strategic giving pillars. We know there are challenges out there right now, and we're looking forward to the discussion around the data that Shelter Animals Count is going to present that will provide some insights and an engaging conversation that we can all have on how we can possibly fix that. So I'm going to turn it back over to Kristen.
Great, thank you. You may be wondering why this looks like the Brady Bunch. It's because we're all going to be on camera the whole time today. A weird Zoom is making us all stay on camera and not go off. So you'll get to see our faces the entire time along with the presentation. But I just want to do a quick round of telling you who is here so you know who we are. We have Samantha Hill's going to kick it off for us. Samantha, will you raise your hand? Samantha is a Shelter Animals Count and our very own data wizard. We have Meg Meredith and Deb Fair from Pedigree Foundation. We have Mike Kiley, who is the president of Shelter Animals Count Board, and Stephanie Filer, who is the executive director of Shelter Animals Count. Oh gosh, then we have Ed Jameson and Adam Lamb, who are going to be here with Claire Callison for our panel, which will be the second half of the conversation, where we dig into how we actually fix this with some top experts in transport. And finally, we have Karen Walsh here with the ASPCA, who is a wealth of knowledge on the history in this current moment in transport. Transport was one of the topics we thought was the most important to discuss because we still haven't figured out how to fix some of the challenges that we face. So with that, welcome to everyone who's here. And just like with all of these calls, we are going to kick it off with the most important part, which is the data. So I'll turn it over to you, Samantha.
All right, thanks so much. I will just start out here. I'll dive right in and we'll keep things moving. So I want to start by talking about really how we engage with transfer data and some of the challenges with it. Transfers in and transfers out are unique intake and outcome types because they focus on how animals are moving within the animal welfare system from organization to organization. So at an individual organization level, transfers in and out are vital to understanding the capacity of that organization. But when we talk about transfers at an aggregate level, we have to consider a few things. And the first is related to double counting of animals in intakes and outcomes. So let's look at this dog's journey, for example. The dog enters organization 1 as a stray intake. That's the dog's first intake type. The dog is then transferred out by the first organization. This is the dog's first outcome, and then transferred into organization 2, which is the dog's second intake. The dog is then adopted, which is its second outcome in this scenario. So in this case, the dog would have 2 intakes and 2 outcomes when we aggregate that data from both organizations. An animal that's transferred out of one organization into another organization had that original intake from the community. And so there is that potential for double counting intakes and outcomes when we're aggregating. This is why when we aggregate intakes and outcomes, we talk about community intakes and community outcomes, which is taking those transfers in and transfers out of those total numbers. And then we also have another challenge with transfer in and transfer out data. Transfers in may not always equal transfers out. This may seem counterintuitive, but here's why that's the case. In general, we find that transfers out tend to be lower than transfers in at a national level when we're aggregating. And this is because transfers in are coming from additional sources. They're not just the shelters and rescues, where transfers out are captured as the shelters and rescues in throughout the country. So animals coming in, for example, from national organizations during large-scale cases, those would be captured as transfers in, but those national organizations handling those are not necessarily reporting a transfer out to SAC. We also know that a portion of transfers in are coming from international locations, and since we don't have those organizations reporting transfers out to us, we know this increases our transfers in without increasing transfers out. So this is why we include transfers in and transfers out when we talk about rates. So an adoption rate, where we look at adoptions over total intakes, which would include transfers in. This allows for those animals that we don't have that original intake type for to be accounted for in those transfers, as an animal that is transferred in from one of those sources may have resulted in that adoption. So here's just some, now that we've kind of set the stage there a little bit, here's going to be some national trends for transports. And I'm going to focus on these transfer ins specifically. So for dogs and cats combined, transfers in have actually decreased by 3% when comparing 2023 to 2019, but dogs and cats separately have had very different experiences. For cats, transfers in have been increasing over the last 3 years. 2023 was lower than 2022, but there is an upward trend happening for cats in the transfer space. Trends were 16% higher than 2019, or 96,000 cats. Cats are now making up more of the transfers throughout the industry than they did in previous years. Dogs, on the other hand, have seen decreases in transfers in by 14%, or 133,000 dogs, where they used to make up 60% of transfers across the country in 2019. In 2023, those dog and cat numbers are much closer together. So what else are we seeing with dog transfers? We wanted to look into the makeup of dog transfers to see how they've shifted over the years as well. While we don't have information on why animals are transferred, we are able to use animal level data to see a shift in the dogs identified as medium, large, extra large by their size, what portion of transports those are making up. We're only showing medium and large dogs, large and extra large is combined on this chart. Consistently, you'll see medium-sized dogs make up the largest portion of incoming transports. Medium dogs have been pretty consistent in what portion of transfers they make up, but there is an increase in 2021 and then a decrease in 2023 to be 1 percentage point lower than 2019. For large and extra large dogs, they've experienced an increase from 2019 to 2021, reaching a peak of 33% in 2021. They too have seen decreases and are now at 28%, which is lower than 2019 levels by 2 percentage points. So larger dogs are making up a bit less of the transfer in space than they were pre-pandemic. This chart is to show some changes in length of stay. We're using median length of stay here because when we were looking at the distribution of length of stay across our organizational sample, there were extremes, and median allows for a more representative number from our sample. So this is showing that median length of stay for transferred in dogs. It's interesting that the length of stay here has increased year over year from 2019 to 2023. We've gone from 9 days in care to 13. So knowing that that median length of stay is rising, we also looked at how outcomes are distributed based on those lengths of stay. And we see that even with that longer length of stay for transfers, dogs who are transferred in are most likely to still have an adoption outcome through that median time frame. The top line of this chart shows that of dogs that had a transfer in intake, what percentage of them had an adoption outcome based on how long those dogs have stayed in shelters. So here at point 2, out of all the dogs that were transferred in and had 2 days length of stay, about 75% of them had an adoption outcome. So the top line of this chart is focused on those transfers in, and you can see that the transfer in for dogs are more likely to have that adoption outcome when compared to owner surrenders and strays. When we look at national totals, the trends are averages. So organizations may be experiencing very different trends. So we wanted to show some examples of that. And out of a sample of organizations with complete data for 2019 through 2023, this map is showing where the top 10 receiving organizations, which are in yellow, and the top 10 outgoing or sending organizations, which are in blue, are located across the US. One organization was in both categories, and that is in green. As you can see, not all of the top receiving organizations have seen decreases in dog transfers compared to 2019. So this is looking at 2023 versus 2019. 2 organizations actually saw increases in transfers in, and the other 8 organizations have experienced a decrease of varying levels of transfers in. So when we look at percent change over time, which was on that previous slide, we also want to look at rates to see if these changes in transfers in are proportional to shifts in intakes overall for these individual organizations. The first 2 organizations, which saw increases in transfers in, and so above that, I'm putting the percent change of transfers in for you. They saw increases in transfers in, meaning that, and they saw increases in their transfer rate, meaning that more of their intakes in 2023 were transfers than they were in 2019. The second group of organizations in yellow, they saw decreases in their transfers in. However, their 2023 transfer in rate still increased. So this also means that even while these organizations have decreased their transfers, more of their intakes are actually transfers in. The third group, which I didn't outline in a box there, is just the rest of the organizations here. They had a decrease in transfers in, and their transfer in rate also decreased. So this means that their transfers in are making up smaller portions of their intakes than they were in 2019, possibly due to higher community intake needs. The other side of transfers is obviously transfers out. So I did just want to quickly show the top 10 organizations that transfer out, just to show that those percentages also are varied by organization. So just to recognize that while talking about national averages, your organization may have been experiencing a different situation. And with that, I will pass it back over to Kristen.
Thank you so much, Samantha, for that. It's just, there's so much there. I was really struck particularly by that graph showing the likelihood of having a adoption outcome. That's so fascinating. I really hadn't thought of the data that way. So thanks for all the thought you put into looking at the data in ways maybe we haven't all thought of. I'm going to turn it over now to 2 people that I respect a great deal, who have a lot to say about this space and I think have thought deeply about it. Karen Walsh from the ASPCA and Mike Kiley from the MSPCA and the Shelter Animals Count Board.
Thank you. So Mike and I are going to divide this up a little bit. We've talked about this quite a bit as to what would be the best approach for you. So I'm going to be a little bit of the negative side and talk about a lot of the problems that exist in transport. And then Mike's going to get to sweep in and talk about some solutions. And then we'll move on to our panel. So the history of transport can be traced in animal welfare back to the early 90s. It was very small at that time, and there were just certain groups that were doing it, but it wasn't the robust programs that we all saw develop pre-pandemic. Our goals before the pandemic started would have made us at about 50,000 animals transferred, which was an enormous number. And now we're close to half of that. So when you look at the data that was being shown, you can see that it's impacting different organizations in different ways, but it is impacting all of us the way that transport has changed over time. So more and more organizations have gotten into transport in different ways as well. So some of the pieces of the pie are being cut in a lot of different directions. And then we also have people that are in their own individual cars driving across the country and moving animals. And those numbers really aren't captured in our data at this time because they really don't get reported. So there's a lot of different ways to look at transport. And this SAC snapshot is really the best way that we have at the moment to really determine what's happening. And so what kind of problems are we seeing across the country? that have led us going from sort of this transport superhighway that happened during the pandemic, where lots of animals that were moving would not have had opportunities before. And because destinations were more empty and the public were adopting like crazy, we had animals moving and people were excited. It was a great time to be in animal welfare, and it is a time where a lot of people entered our space. Sources that are now choosing to focus on relocation are finding this space to be very frustrating. And sources are shelters that have animals to send. They may be shelters that have less resources in their community, and they're often focusing on relocation as a quick fix because they're seeing animals staying in their shelters for a longer period of time. The huge concern with that is that we are seeing that a lot of destinations have less space and less opportunities. And so if that's the focus of the source, they may end up spinning their wheels. Whereas if they were looking at with their local community more and working on internal pathways, they might find that their animals actually move through their own system faster than they would if they were waiting for transport. There are more animals that are being put forward that have medical conditions or that are not properly or appropriately prepared for transport that can make the entire framework at risk, because the more that disease gets sent across the country, the more that the destinations are challenged with treating animals rather than being able to put them up quickly for adoption. And that can also increase their length of stay at both ends. Transport has to be looked at as a flow. The source shelters need to have animals that are appropriately prepared for transport with vaccination on intake and good solid medical protocols that are then put forward to be transferred. And then when they're transferred, they move quickly through the destination shelter so that we're not tying up kennels at both ends with animals that are just waiting. And if the most appropriate thing is adopting locally, then those animals should not be held for transport, but should be passed out through to the own community. There's a lot of best practices violations that are going on where people are driving incredibly long distances and not in a safe way with animals, or they're driving in vehicles that have no climate control and animals that are put in dangerous situations. Multi-species transports, we're very focused on fear-free and on how the animals' experiences on transport. And so when we put rabbits or cats in with a transport of dogs, you can imagine that their transport experience is difficult. And so when they get to the destination, they're more likely to break with illness, which again, log jams the transport. So those types of focuses for how people are preparing animals for transports are really important. Some receiving shelters are also adding requirements in a way that depletes sources' resources even more. So they're struggling to do things like spay neuter before transport, when those resources may be better used within the community. Building a relationship between a source and destination is really important too. Thinking about the language that's used to advertise those animals once they come to the destination. If they're rescued from a kill shelter, it's often a real negative for the source that's trying to build that relationship with the destination. So utilizing better language to talk about the resource shift and why these resources are necessary and why the destinations may have more resources than the source shelters do. We're also seeing staffing challenges. Everybody knows that hiring is difficult at the moment, hiring people that have experience. A large portion of the people that are now in animal welfare have not been in it long, and they're trying to catch up. And the people that have been here are also trying to train new people and help them come in and learn the space so that we're all working together again. The reduction in institutional knowledge across transport and across sheltering has left us with a sort of a learning curve that we're working on now. Unfortunately, there's lots of resources out there now that are there to help train people. So there is a light at the end of that tunnel. And then access to vet care is a big issue as well. Being able to hire veterinarians, retain veterinarians, have support staff, be able to offer things like health certificates, spay neuter, medical support that's affordable for shelters at both ends of the spectrum has certainly become a big challenge. And then following the shelter standards for medical care. If you're overcrowding your shelter because you're not moving animals towards pathways, if they're not moving through the system, it's really a good idea to reach out and get some support or some fact-based evidence of how to better move animals through the system, and do some really solid pathway planning in your shelter. So overall, this issue has exposed lots of other deep-rooted concerns that exist in sheltering. And an over-reliance on relocation to solve capacity issues can actually logjam the animals in the shelters waiting for additional help that may not be there right now. So to get through all of this, we need to look at what solutions are available for us if we all work together. If we network this problem and work together, we have a much greater chance of solving the issues. So I'm going to pass it over to Mike to be very positive and talk to us about solutions.
I love that I get to be the positive one. So that's a nice change for me. Thanks for having me on this. I think I want to just note here that I have what I think is a unique viewpoint on relocation. Has worked for the MSPCA for 30 years. And when relocation started to become more popularized in New England, I was pretty resistant to relocation as a strategy, mostly because we were recognizing that there were animals in Massachusetts that were still falling through the cracks and weren't getting attention. And I felt it was our responsibility as a large organization in Massachusetts to really make sure that we build those support systems like access to affordable care and doing community outreach work. But then had the opportunity to merge another organization into the MSPCA, and that was Northeast Animal Shelter, which was founded in 1976 with the basis of relocation since 1976 being their mission, and went from 0 to 60. Went from the no relocation to the largest relocation center in New England. And entering that space it happened during COVID, and it was something that I saw a lot of the the challenges and issues that Karen has described about what the relocation program was when we took it on, and what we could make it by working together with with other shelters, working with national organizations to help move the animals, and using the power of a receiving shelter to be able to affect some amount of change and get to a place where we felt good about the relocation program that we had. And really, as I describe it, what we were looking to do is move relocation from an endpoint program where that is the only solution to something that's a starting point program where we can start working together with other shelters to address the deeper roots that were causing the overpopulation issue to begin with in the communities that we were receiving the animals from. So during COVID, there was not a lot of animals to move. And as we started to move out of COVID, there started to become an increasing amount of need. And we were meeting that need pretty easily for a while because we had a lot of space available to us. But in early 2023, we started to see all of our shelters start to have a capacity related issue. And first and foremost, we looked at the shelter animals count data. As someone who's a board member of Shelter Animals Count, I wanted to make sure that what we were seeing was if it was unique to us, why, or if it's not unique to us, what can we learn from that data? And it really helped me to understand that there was a massive problem that was happening with capacity related to dogs, and that everyone was starting to panic. We just happened to start to feel it at the sort of back end of that change. And when I started to look at it, we started to realize also from the Shelter Animals Count data that yes, although transports were down, the root cause was that outcomes for animals were down, outcomes for dogs was down, and that we needed to take a step back and look at the root cause issue. And we recognized that the root cause issue was a lack of outcomes, and that we needed to think about where we were starting to have capacity issues. What are the choices we make right now? It was either we reduce or stop relocating animals to deal with our capacity issues, or change something that we were doing to increase adoptions and keep relocation preserved. And that was what we really wanted to do. We realized that relocation was slowing down, and that there was less options, putting more pressure on those overcrowded shelter systems, and that we didn't want to be another group that also had to reduce if we didn't have to. So first we looked internally, and we looked at what are the reasons that adoption started slowing for our organization. And there was a recognition as we polled our staff and asked them about how they're operating and what choices they're making when they're presented with common issues for adoption. We started to realize, we have always considered ourselves a low barrier adoption program, but because the way that COVID worked, we had a staff changeover that was pretty significant during COVID. And we also switched to appointment only, where, from a human safety standpoint, and there was this huge interest in adoption all during that same time. And bad habits started to form in our organization, and we started to become less of a low barrier adoption program And these sort of tendencies that happen for all those reasons needed to be addressed first if we were going to start getting outcomes. So we completely addressed that with our team. We created a new document that gave them guidance on when they experience, like when an old person comes in and wants to adopt a kitten or a puppy, how should you respond? And it's not no, it's gave them more direction on how to operate as a low barrier adoption program, which immediately started increasing our adoption ability. But we needed to go a little further than that because we wanted to make sure that we were continuously addressing the needs that were out there. So we switched to adoption events, which rose the attention of the press and to our community that this problem was happening to begin with. We are a big media market. We recognize that we have a powerful voice in that, and the PR was very interested in this issue. And we were able to tell the story not only of what we're doing to try to help get animals into homes, and we were focused on large breed dogs and focused on getting adopted animals out quickly so that we could keep kennels open for local and relocated animals. And it really worked. The PR was great. They've actually continue to cover these stories now for a year and a half, which is just not what PR does. This is an interesting topic to them, and they are interested in seeing what's happening out there and understanding it, but also what the solutions are. And this year, to try to keep it going, we went a little step further in that we started to do the adoption events similar to what we did in 2023, but focused it on some key communities and key shelters that were experiencing this sort of national dog crisis the most, whether it's New York or Miami or other groups. We wanted to really tell that story because we knew that they were getting so much heat internally and externally for euthanasia decision making. And we wanted to lift up their voices and show to the public that every shelter is interconnected. We're all working together and everyone owns a part of the solutions, and that the shelters that are often labeled as as high kill or vilified for making decisions for euthanasia were actively part of the solution, but are facing a much bigger challenge than we are in Massachusetts. And so part of that storytelling was to also make sure that people understood the realities and supported the shelters that were over capacity, not tear them down. So I think, reflecting on the last year and a half and what we've done, we're proud of our accomplishments, but also we recognize that there are some issues that these challenges expose and some solutions that also come along with them. And I think one of the things that I have started to feel is that there is a little bit of a disconnect between regions, and that there is not necessarily a recognition that we are all interconnected and that all of our decisions impact each other, whether we relocate animals or not. What decisions we make at home impacts the overall opportunities for dogs in communities everywhere. And I want to make sure that that gets stated, loudly. I'll give you my perspective from New England. New England has been known as a region that has helped create solutions for national problems. But I think, with this current impact from staffing changeover and stress and this change in population and people dealing with this sometimes for the first time from a loss of institutional knowledge, from leadership changing over during COVID, there is a little bit less understanding that New England, if we do make changes, can help out other regions. And I think that is probably true in all regions, that we are not recognizing that we can impact positively others by just changing our policies at home. So for that, like I said, the way that we approached this challenge was to break down adoption barriers. And you can see the debate continue in Facebook groups and at conferences, that there is a real resistance to breaking down those barriers. But this is the time to do it. If we want more positive outcomes for dogs, we all need to make some changes to how we approach our adoption programs, and making it hard for people to adopt and not welcoming them into our mission does not serve animals overall. And our goal is not just to help the animals that enter our shelter, but it's to help homeless animals around the country. Sorry, I'll go on a soapbox for too long, so I'll move on to the other points. But I think also trusting in your community to adopt animals and not using relocation for animals that can get adopted in your community, but you don't want them to get adopted in your community, those practices have to end. And I walked into that experience taking over Northeast Animal Shelter and recognized that many of our partners, it wasn't that they couldn't adopt the animals, it's that they didn't want the community to adopt the animals. And that is a bad place for us to be as an animal welfare movement. We need to trust our community first, adopt out as many animals locally as we can, and relocation should be reserved for those that cannot find homes because of volume, not because of choice. And I think also, we shouldn't stop at relocation. If we can't relocate animals, temporarily or permanently because of the issues that we're having at home, but we want to solve those issues, there are other ways to support other than relocation. We have found that with some of the groups that we mentor in South Carolina, that when they were desperate and hitting capacity issues and wanted to relocate more and we couldn't do it, it felt hopeless for us. But we found that we could actually join them and help build out an adoption event there and give them some support and send people down to show them how to operate a larger volume adoption event and teach new tools to be able to help increase those outcomes. And provide support even just from making sure that we think about changing our language. Like I said, the one thing that we changed, and I think Karen alluded to, is how do we describe each other? And when we do PR, we are cognizant that we never say we're saving these animals from this other shelter, because what that does is positions us as the heroes and the other shelters as a villain. And that's where our dangerous language like high kill shelters comes from. What we need to do instead is recognize that we're all in this together. We're all partnering together to help animals, and that doesn't happen just from one organization. That happens from organizations partnering together. And I think ultimately it feels like there is, I'll say one other thing, which is a little bit more controversial, which is I do recognize that both in the receiving shelter areas up in New England and even at some of the source shelters, there's so much pressure about euthanasia right now that there is sometimes a fear to make appropriate euthanasia decisions for animals that we know and have demonstrated that they're not placeable, that there's definable aggression issues. But I think, they are taking up valuable space right now, and we have to think about how do we help the largest number of animals right now where everybody is desperate and there is a lot of need out there. We should be focusing on the ones that we can definitely get out and be thoughtful and consider that. I know I might get a lot of controversial messages about bringing up maybe we need to make decisions for euthanasia, but I think that is a reality that we're in right now. And even the most staunch no-kill supporters and promoters also don't believe that unplaceable animals that are aggressive should be attempted to be rehomed. So I think we need to think about that component. And I will leave with this, is just that I do think this is a period of time in which it feels like there is no hope and that there is no solutions. But I think sometimes the simplest solutions are the ones that can actually regenerate some components, but it requires us to work differently, challenge ourselves to re-examine some of the policies that we have, and think deeply about how do we approach helping the largest number of animals as our main goal. And when we do that, we start to see some of the changes that we can make happen to get through this challenging time. So I'll stop talking and hand it back over to Kristen.
Great, thank you. I'm actually going to take over. Chris has some dogs barking in the background, so we're going to tag team. But thank you, Mike, and thank you, Karen. Really gives us a lot to set the stage for the next part on the panel. So let's start by having Ed, Adam, and Claire, I think, are the only three we haven't formally introduced. So I'll let each of you introduce yourselves quickly. Ed, do you want to start?
Sure. Thanks, Stephanie. I'm Ed Jameson. I'm the CEO for Operation Kindness. It's a nonprofit organization just north of the city of Dallas. I come with just shy of 20 years of government experience, coming from the municipal shelters, most recently at Dallas Animal Services, where pre-pandemic we were bringing in 40,000 dogs and cats a year. So coming over to the nonprofit side, it's an interesting perspective, very, very municipal focused, and trying to have the nonprofit help really help the municipals with what they need help with and not tell them what they need help with. Into it, when we talk about the transport, I didn't really want to be in transport. We have a really robust open adoption process at Operation Kindness. We ended up getting into transport to be additive to try to help other shelters, particularly in the DFW area. Transport is expensive. Transport is hard. There's a lot of logistics that go into it. And again, that was something that when I was a municipal, I don't really think the municipals should totally be taking that on themselves, and that when the nonprofits can help with that or even take it all on. And so that's what we're trying to do. It's been about 1.5 years of transport. I've worked with Mike, I've worked with Karen on there. Lots of learning experiences through that we'll talk about more as we get through here. But that's kind of my perspective, and I'm happy to be on this call.
My name's Adam Lamb. I'm the CEO for Brandywine Valley SPCA. We are in the entire state of Delaware and 7 counties in Pennsylvania. I, like Ed, started my career in municipal government at a shelter in Tampa, Florida, with over 35,000 animals that were coming in. Been in this location for a little over 10 years. Our transport program has been operational for 9 of those years, and we've transported in over 44,000 animals total. So we're averaging about 5,000 to 6,000 animals a year. For me, it's really important, the transport space, and I go back to probably 6 years ago when we were sitting around in a national meeting and everyone said there's no point in spending time in trying to solve the transport because it won't be needed. And I think if we look at today, we need transport more than ever. So I'm really excited to be a part of this discussion.
Hi, everyone. My name's Claire Callison. I'm the Senior Director of Operations at Austin Pets Alive here in Austin, Texas. I've worked most of my animal welfare career in Texas, starting in San Antonio and then making my way up to Austin. I've had the great fortune of working with many shelters in the state in Texas, and transporting out to other regions in the country. I tend to be biased and advocate heavily for under-resourced shelters, and knowing the struggles firsthand of working my way up from high euthanasia shelters, seeing the worst of the worst, and understanding the reality of what under-resourced shelters and what it looks like to be a shelter or more of a holding facility in some regions of our state that have one ACO caring for dozens of animals, and the only option is euthanasia, and knowing what that experience is like. And so I'm a heavy advocate in that, in trying to build at Austin Pets Alive, building a pipeline to fill that missing gap of resources to allow dogs and cats to find a live outcome, whether it be through local adoption programs or RTO efforts, and also transport being just one tool of many. So happy to be here.
Okay, so we wanted you all to come today because I feel like we are in this space with, I travel to shelters all over the country, both sending and receiving. And we're in this place where I keep hearing shelters say, we're not even trying anymore. If the dog is over 25 pounds, no one's going to take it. And I really want to get your thoughts on that. And I guess the question is this true? And is there anything shelters can be doing if they are a sending or a receiving shelter to help what I guess we call medium and large dogs, but any dog that lives in a big kennel at this time? And that is for all of you, anyone that wants to answer.
Hey, that's great, Kristen. I think that we're all dealing with that. We get it. In a perfect world, the animals are able to move easier and faster. You want to do that, you can help more. Claire can attest to this. In Texas, there are a ton of medium and big dogs, a ton, not even blockheads. Just a ton. That there's huskies, there's shepherds, there's the herding animals, there's tons and tons and tons. It's a volume situation down. One of the things I really tip my hat to Mike and his team in Massachusetts is we're like, hey, we need to try to send a mix of animals. Yes, we've got small animals that are in jeopardy here in Texas, but medium and big as well. And his team does a really good job of trying to be open to that. To say, hey, don't have them be 100% of dogs over 70 pounds, but can we get a mix? But we are seeing more and more of the shelters now in this post-pandemic, the receiving shelters are saying they only want the small dogs. Again, at Operation Kindness, I can adopt all those out. I can adopt almost every one of those that I can get throughout the DFW and adopt those out right here. I get it if you've got to sprinkle in some, or there's some that need medical that we're able to perform, and that just makes sense to catch a ride. But I also understand up in the north, it doesn't do any good to clog your systems up either. So I would really, really encourage people to take that attitude that Mike and his team, that I know that Adam and his teams up there do, of really reducing the barriers on there and looking at yourselves, that are there things that you're doing that are helping to clog the system as well. And most of us groups, and I'm certainly not going to speak for Claire, but I think that we could send you a whole mix of animals, but I don't know that we're really, if we're sending 60 dogs under 25 pounds, I just don't think that is what's helping, because most places throughout Texas and the South could probably adopt the majority of those out themselves.
Well, I'll just say from the other end, I appreciate the compliments, first of all, Ed, but I think, that's what we tried to shift to. There are some physical limitations for for what we can take in that do necessitate some, younger puppies coming in to be able to fit those spaces, or smaller dogs. But I think ultimately what we've been trying to do at our organization is really build a relationship and trust with the shelter that we're receiving the animals from, so that we understand what works best in our community and what they have. And one thing that we really like to do is try to get a sense of what they need to move to have success. And if they can move animals locally to either rescue groups or direct adoption, we want them to do that. And then we want to take in the dogs that do provide them some relief and build that capacity. And we've really challenged the idea that people don't want to adopt large breed dogs or pit bull breeds. Most of our adoption events are solely focused on adult large breed dogs or pit bulls, and that's how we advertise them. And what we've seen is that in Massachusetts, when we advertise that's what needs to get adopted, recognizes it may not be the same everywhere, they're adopting them. So it gives our team inspiration that we should continue to take in larger breed dogs, pit bull breeds, because they are getting adopted and they are helping some of those similar looking breeds that are in our shelters that aren't moving also get adopted. So when we do our adoption events, it's both for the relocated animals and for the animals that come in locally, and they all get assistance and more of them get out the door.
Yeah, I would just add one thing to that. We had to shift our model slightly when it comes to transport. When some of our groups that would take the larger humane societies that could take 20, 30, 40 at a time were decreasing, or just saying, hey, we're closing our doors completely to transport. Instead of just giving up, we really just networked more with smaller groups, medium-sized groups. And what we realized is if we had multiple receiving partners on the other end, we were able to fill a transport. So we invested quite a bit in doing outreach, and sometimes that's cold calling, but more often we're having more success in talking to our existing partners. And even if they had to reduce down from 15 to 5, right, asking who they know, who they would recommend, and getting a larger network that way. So just being really scrappy in that sense, not just throwing your hands up and giving up, but trying to work with your receiving partners on the other end, because they don't want to say no either. They didn't want to decrease their numbers, but just say, hey, listen, this is where we're at. We understand. I was never, ever wanting to shame a partner from having to reduce down, because we know it's painful on both sides, but just asking, hey, can you help us in this? Can you connect us with other groups? And we were able to keep filling transports in that way, but we just had to do it in a little different fashion. I would definitely advocate for bringing teams together, bringing your internal team together, whether it be staff or volunteers, and do whiteboarding sessions and brainstorming. Think about outside the box ideas, no matter how out of the box it seems. Just throwing those ideas out there, because that gives that sense of hope that it's not just, okay, we did this one thing, it's not working, but thinking of other solutions and other ideas, asking your volunteers, and bringing people from different expertise, like marketing experts and things, sales. What do they know that we could throw at this? I think it's been a huge key to just keep that hope going when times get tough.
And for me, I think the biggest thing that has changed in the transport in the last couple of years is the actual shelters that are available to take animals. And I think that while we all are faced with the challenges across the country, we are really lucky in the Northeast that we're in a position that we can help the animals of the South. So I really think it's important for us to get back to getting creative, even in the Northeast shelters, or any shelter that has any level of capacity. Even if it's 5 kennels that can be earmarked for transport, there's a lot of animals' lives that can be saved by those 5 kennels. So for me, I know how much work goes into sending and receiving. Ed said it, it's a ton of work. And I know it's probably easier to focus on other projects, but it is a life or death thing, and you are truly saving 2 animals. And I go back to, for me, what was really impactful is just supply and demand in my own local market. I've seen tons and tons of people going to dog breeders in Lancaster County, the county over, because we did not have the diversity that we needed to have, and the people that wanted to do the right thing and adopt animals. So I think there's tons of animals, and Ed and I've worked together too. And ultimately, like, we're really good at taking medium to large dogs and having a blended sound transport, but no one should judge if there's kennels in your space that you can allocate for it, and you can start to help animals that are dying somewhere. Even if it's not the right partner for you, there's partners out there that could be a good partner for you. So I think it comes down to just understanding the partnership on both sides and being committed to supporting each other and the overall life-saving initiative that we all want to see.
Yeah, and something that was, and piggybacking on what Adam just said there too, Mike had talked about there was a time not long ago where people were like, oh, this is a short-term thing. We're about to be done with this. Again, you really need to try to build what you can do locally. Pre-pandemic, we would have meetings with the big cities of Texas, and we had one right before the pandemic. And it was really interesting that Dallas's adoption numbers versus rescue numbers compared to the city of Houston and city of San Antonio, our friends there, they relied so heavily on transport and the adoptions. They were like inverse of each other. And I remember saying to them, man, these animals are coming locally. I think that Dallas and San Antonio and Houston were all fairly similar as far as makeups, and they were talking about there were some long-standing transports that were actually adding the length of stay. And Mike had talked about that earlier. And so they were really looking at, hey, maybe they should start investing more in their adoptions. Then the pandemic happened, everything changed, and then just overall acquisition as a whole changed from there. But I think that there's definitely a time and a place for it. With transport now, again, I didn't even want to, it wasn't our plan. We try to be additive. We do about 6,000 animals through our adoption program. And so anything that we get now is supposed, we're trying to do above baseline. But I'm envisioning a model where, because everybody wants to transport, everybody, there's not a city in Texas that would not say, oh yes, we'll send animals up. Gets very confusing. I think that we start to lose some of the strategic, and are you driving past places that might be able to kind of my vision. Again, I certainly don't want to speak for Claire, but I do know kind of what they're working on. Some of our visions are kind of a hubbing situation as far as that, hey, can different groups work together on where you're getting those, and they come in, they get all of the medical and everything that they need, and then ultimately to make their way up and then get dispersed. If there could be one group in an area in the north that's able to get them and then get them to those other smaller groups as well. Also, that's, in my opinion, is a really, really good setup. It's hard to get that because everybody's capacity is not at, to be able to take those levels right now. Us at Operation Kindness, we can't take all the animals in here. Claire can't take them all in Austin. We're trying to work together. We kind of take north of Waco, try to call us, south of Waco, call Austin, and let's see what we can do to get these animals moved. But
can I ask you, so I think this is a good time to show the runt of my current foster puppy litter, who thanks to Claire Callison and Austin Pets Alive will be headed up to Utah to be adopted on a transport in a week. And so it's become really personal for me. I'm not a puppy foster. This was a special situation, but it's become personal because I've tried to get these puppies adopted here in Texas. No one's taking them, and it's shocking. I mean, they're the cutest puppies. Like, this is the cutest puppy you've ever seen. And so I know for these guys, they don't have a very good chance unless they get out of here. And yet I hear people in receiving communities say, like, this is displacing our own local populations. Like, this is making it hard for us to get our pets adopted. Like, I still don't quite know how to respond to that and how we balance those two things. And I thought you all may have could tell us, how do you communicate like that this isn't an either or to your communities?
I mean, I can speak for me because it's a constant thing that I get. I mean, we are an open access shelter that is still responsible for all of the stray animals in our community, and all of our transport work we don't believe displaces. We believe it brings more traffic into our shelter that ultimately helps place some of our larger breed local dogs in our community. So for us, we've been able to demonstrate that and show that. I mean, we just had our mega adoption event and we placed 1,100 animals, and 50% of them were transport animals, and 6 other partners that came from Texas and other states that brought animals, placed animals as well. So for us, we really strongly believe that, you got to kind of drown out the noise of what everyone thinks is going on and truly just show them the impact. When we spend a lot of effort on that adoption event, but we know it creates a huge amount of work, but it creates a huge amount of relief for a lot of shelters. And these Texas shelters are bringing their own animals from Palm Valley and from Montgomery County, placing them themselves. And all I'm doing is giving them an outlet to other adopters in other markets. So I believe the adopters are there. It's just a matter of how we get to those folks. And we may have to spend a little bit more money to get those folks to come out. And frankly, I think adoption events bring out a different adopter that would not, unfortunately, step foot in a shelter. And whether we like it or not, there's people out there that still believe a shelter is not a place that they can emotionally go to. So, you know, it's shocking to me to see the amount of people that come out, like over 4,000 people came out to our event just to adopt animals. So that we would not understand why they're not coming in on a regular basis. So it's creating a buzz. And I think it goes to Mike's point early on, is just, we got to look at how we are operating. We can't operate the same way, but we also can't get discouraged by what's happening in the communities and the markets, because at the end of the day, we have been in a much worse place 15 years ago. So we just got to get innovative and creative of how we kind of dig ourselves out of this.
Yeah, and I would say this question comes up. Sorry if I cut somebody off. I think the, you know, are we hurting local animals by relocating animals in? I would say absolutely not. I mean, Adam is spot on with all of the things that he said. And I think the part that gets really challenging right now is that everyone's feeling this sense of desperation and hopelessness. And I think we sometimes look for reasons to blame it on, things to blame it on. And sometimes it is the shelter that's bringing in animals from relocation. And the conversation always goes like this for me. Someone says, well, I can't get animals adopted because you're bringing them in through relocation. And then I ask, have you looked at your adoption practices? And are you actually making it? Is it that people aren't adopting, or you're not adopting to them? And that usually leads to a conversation that often the same shelters that are worried about this issue have not changed their approach to adoptions, have not reduced those barriers, have not opened those doors for people to join the mission in a way that doesn't allow for the adoption potential that they want to have actually become a reality. So I think that's like a point that we can't lose through this, is that the simplest thing that we can all do right now is start at the basics. And if we can remove those barriers, a lot of opportunity exists. And we like telling stories when we do our adoption event. We like lifting up other organizations, not just ours. And we like those adoption events to help local and relocated animals. And we've recognized that people respond to the mission. It's not the, you know, the other issue that comes up is fee waived adoption events being problematic. We're just removing a fee, everybody. It's not a big deal. And that it's about getting people's attention on the mission, having them join that mission. And we pull in local dogs from animal control prior to the event, because we know every time we do an event, the advertisement alone gets people excited in our community to adopt, and they often adopt at full adoption fee the weekend before the event, and then they adopt throughout the adoption event too. So anything that we do for relocation brings attention to the overall issue, and it helps animals overall. It's not a competition.
Claire or Adam?
Yeah, I don't think I have too much more to add to that. They said it absolutely right. I think it's important to remember taking a local first approach always. You know, a lot of us, I mean, I don't know a city in the country that doesn't have large breed dogs with either medical challenges or behavior challenges. And so I think it's the type of animal that you're bringing in into your transport network, and understanding where your loyalty lies and where your focus lies. And we have the same issue in Austin, where we're focused on a certain population locally, but it opens up a broader population that we can bring in from other parts of our state. And so just it's a balancing game, but I agree with Adam of drowning out that noise and not letting that deter us from the bigger mission.
Adam, I want to make sure, we're going to run out of time. And you said this thing when we were getting ready for the call that like has stuck with me, where you talked about just 5 kennels. And I was hoping you could share that with this group specifically about sort of the call to action for everyone on this call.
For my end, I think that, there's nothing that is too small of an effort. So if you could, especially from the receiving side, you can look within your organization and determine what you could set aside as far as a resource. Because I can assure you that there's animals that are dying in this country that would be glad to take those kennels and make that opportunity and that connection with your shelter. So my biggest thing is just look at your internally, determine what you think that you could set aside as far as a resource. And for me, 5 kennels was where we started. So that's why the 5 kennels sticks with me, because our shelter struggled with this concept when I first got here. And now we're one of the biggest players in animal transport, and every one of us believes strongly in the work that is being done on both sides and the commitment. Like, we give back resources to the shelters that we work with. So I just really encourage, because what we need right now is we need shelters that are willing to take animals, especially medium to large sized dogs. But even if you're not a shelter that can take a medium to a large breed dog, even if it is a small portion dog, any movement is a good movement. So that's my call to action to everyone, is to find more shelters that are willing to take dogs. And we will support you in the journey of that process and any negative impact that may come your way.
Thank you so much. After this call, I see there are so many questions, and we're going to get those answered for you. After this call, we will make sure you have everyone's contact information. And the folks on this call asked us to let you know that they are beyond maxed out on how many animals they're taking, and they are some of the biggest helpers in the entire country. And we do need more people taking, and it's just even a few animals, even for government shelters, just having those 5 kennels set aside, it could be a complete game changer. So we're going to get your questions answered. Make sure you have contact information. And the folks on this call are the people that I call when I don't know what to do. They are experts in so many things animal welfare, and they're really special because every single one of them is willing to help you. If you're one of those shelters that wants to start transporting just a couple of animals and you don't even know where to start, the folks here can help you. So we wanted to have today be just kind of an introduction to getting us all together and getting you access to some of the people that truly have changed the game when it comes to transport. So I want to just thank everyone and turn it back over to Deb Fair from Pedigree Foundation.
Thanks, Kristen. I was trying to unmute myself. I want to thank our panelists for this discussion that we had today, because as I mentioned, transport is one of the strategic giving pillars for Pedigree Foundation. And we focus on this because we have a Shelter Advisory Council, Kristen's very familiar with them, that help us, guide us on how we can have a greater impact with our grant funding and dollars. So we're big believers in transport. The discussion that was had today, I think some of the ideas, like, looking at your operations, the fact that a lot of connecting with your community, and the fact that community, Adam, you said it, they just don't want to go into a shelter. I saw that several people made comments that this was an aha moment for them. So how do you rebrand and create that opportunity for adoption? How do you lower those barriers again? How do you look at your operations? How do you look at your staff changes and educate people on the process so that we can help more animals? And the foundation is a big believer in hubs. We have provided some grants to some hubs out there. So just know that we're super excited about where we can go with this. And Kristen, thank you very much. I know that we also are going to be working on a toolkit on transport that we'll be pushing out as well.
Probably going to have quotes from some of these amazing people here in that toolkit. So thanks, y'all. Please join us for our next call. We're going to be talking about animal shelter safety a month from today, July 19th. Does that sound boring? Maybe it will be anything but, because safety is a critical priority right now with shelters experiencing increased bites due to stress of overcrowding. So please join us. It's going to be an exciting, packed hour giving you hands-on tools to make your shelter safer. And we are here. That'll be number 3 out of 6 Dogs and Data calls. So thanks for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next time.